The words left Jasmine Crockett's lips with a precision that cut sharper than any raised voice. She did not shout, she did not flail. She spoke with the calm strength of someone who had carried truth through storms before. Her sentences landed, one after another, quiet in delivery yet devastating in impact. The studio, which moments earlier had been restless with interruptions and murmurs, now found itself spellbound, every ear drawn to her clarity. Crockett was not simply speaking. She was commanding without force, bending the energy of the room toward her with sheer resolve. And then, in the stillness that followed, came something even more unexpected. Patty Murray, seasoned, composed, known more for her quiet efficiency than dramatic gestures, leaned forward ever so slightly. The camera caught it first, her jaw firm, her expression softened with recognition. Her voice entered the silence gently, almost humbly, but with the weight of undeniable authority. She's right. It wasn't a long speech, just 3 words. But those 3 words carried the power of decades in public service, affirming the voice that so many had doubted. The statement was not performed for applause. It was as if Murray, in that rare moment, allowed the world to see her own respect break through the politics of posturing. And as soon as the words came, the studio atmosphere shifted. The noise died completely. There was no scoff, no cynical chuckle, no dismissive interruption, only a hush that swept across the room like a tide. One quiet nod of respect became louder than 1,000 arguments. The cameras panned across faces frozen in surprise. Supporters sat straighter. Opponents blinked as though recalibrating. It was no longer merely Crockett defending herself against dismissal. In that instant, the hierarchy of credibility had been inverted. Patty Murray's validation wasn't just about agreement. It was about legitimacy, about granting space in the national conversation that arrogance had tried to deny. The silence itself felt historic. And yet, beneath the awe and respect, another question pulsed just as strongly. How did such a simple acknowledgement rise into something so monumental? The scene did not unfold in a vacuum. America's political climate had already reached a fevered pitch, with culture wars erupting in every corner of public discourse. Debates had long ago transformed from forums of thoughtful exchange into arenas of spectacle, where shouting matches replaced substance. And whoever spoke loudest seemed to claim victory. In those spaces, dignity was often drowned out by noise, and validation was not granted, it had to be seized. Jasmine Crockett knew this dynamic intimately. From her very first public appearances, she had been met with dismissal, cloaked as skepticism. Interruptions framed as questioning, arrogance, masquerading as authority. Time after time, she was spoken over, doubted, or told her words carried less weight simply because of who she was and where she came from. Validation, when it came at all, was grudging, never free, withheld as though she had to prove again and again why her voice deserved a place. And that is why the moment Patty Murray intervened, humbly but firmly, was so consequential. Patty Murray was not merely another equal on the panel. She represented establishment credibility, a long career of reputation, measured respect, and political weight. For someone like her to pause and affirm Crockett mid-moment wasn't routine, it was seismic. It shifted the very stakes of the debate. What had begun as yet another attempt to corner Crockett, to force her into defending her position against skepticism, suddenly transformed into something larger. Legitimacy reinforced in front of millions. Murray's validation didn't just affirm Crockett's statement, expose the hollowness of those trying to dismiss her. The humble tone, the quiet authority, contrasted so starkly with the background noise of condescension. It told the studio audience, and the nation by extension, that this wasn't a matter of one congresswoman clawing for recognition against doubters. It was about who America chooses to respect in this new age of chaos and division. And that is what raised the stakes so high. Because beneath the drama of one exchange lived the deeper question: who gets treated as credible in today's America? Who is granted respect automatically and who is forced to fight for it tooth and nail? Crockett's path had never been paved smooth. It was marked by constant proving, constant endurance. Murray's validation broke that cycle, if only for an instant. By saying simply, "She's right," she opened a door that arrogance had worked tirelessly to slam shut. The bigger meaning extended well beyond one debate. In the clash between spectacle and dignity, Crockett embodied the millions across the country who have been silenced, ignored, or doubted. And Murray's nod of respect became a metaphor for something deeper. The idea that even in spaces designed to marginalize, truth can still pierce through when amplified by unexpected voices. For viewers at home, it was impossible not to feel the resonance. Parents told their kids, "Did you hear that?" Workers paused in mid-shift to replay the clip. Recognizing themselves in Crockett's fight against dismissal and in her quiet triumph of validation, the silence that fell across the studio reverberated across the nation because people understood it wasn't just about politics. It was about belonging, about recognition, about justice claimed in real time. And yet this wasn't the first time Jasmine Crockett faced dismissal, but it would be the time history remembered. The villain in this story was not embodied solely in a single person, but in something America has seen time and again: the forces of dismissiveness, arrogance, an interruption wielded like weapons against those who dare to challenge the status quo. It has become almost ritualistic in its repetition. A woman stands to speak, particularly a woman of color, and immediately her authority is questioned. Her credentials dissected, her very presence treated as though it requires justification. Words like unqualified, emotional, or out of place have been launched at women leaders for decades, not as observations, but as strategies to silence them before they can even begin. This pattern stretches back through every layer of political, professional, and cultural history. The stage has long been framed for men to thunder, for their raised voices to be heard as passion and conviction. But when women enter with equal passion, they are told it's hysteria, overreaction, or weakness. The same qualities framed as leadership in men become liabilities in women, and for women of color, the weight doubles. Centuries of stereotypes have been weaponized into every setting: classrooms, workplaces, legislatures, where intelligence and authority are presumed absent until proven otherwise. Cinematic moments from history replay themselves in memory. A woman rising during a debate only to be drowned out by interruptions timed to fray her composure. A Senate floor where a condescending laughter rolls through like a wave, meant not to challenge her words, but to diminish her very right to speak them. Press conferences where a dismissive wave from a powerful rival signals to the audience that her contribution is not worth reflection. In each instance, truth is not met with engagement. It is belittled into silence. The villain here wears predictable costumes: smirks, scoffs, chuckles, timed at key moments to grind dignity down. Consider the long chain of examples: Geraldine Ferraro enduring sneers during the 1984 vice presidential debate, her points dismissed, not with counterarguments, but with visible disdain. Hillary Clinton walking a stage in 2016 as Trump circled her like a predator, his looming frame intended to dwarf rather than debate her words. Kamala Harris in hearings, forced to pause as powerful men reclaimed their time. Her sharp questioning diluted by process weaponized to undercut her control. And countless others, less famous, left invisible when the cameras looked away, but who felt the sting all the same. This tradition of arrogance has always been effective because it relies not on dismantling facts, but on controlling atmosphere. When a room is filled with interruptions, when laughter is timed to turn attention away, when dismissive body language undercuts legitimacy, the audience is subtly guided to question whether the challenger's words matter at all. Such techniques are cheap, but powerful, baiting off the currents of bias, ready to believe that women's power is inherently less credible, less natural than men's. The imagery is haunting because it repeats. Picture a boardroom. A woman lays out her plan, but the voices of men grow louder around her, subsuming her clarity beneath noise. Imagine a televised debate. She makes her case, yet scoffs from rivals arrive right on cue, paired with rolling eyes as if to tell the audience, this is not serious. Even in courtrooms, ellipses of arrogance, gavel bangs, interruptions, low dismissive tones have strung together a narrative designed to cut dignity down to size. The tactics have been plain, but their effect has been devastating. Those who dared stand their ground were often branded combative, unappealing, or unfit, while those who shrank back were erased entirely. Arrogance has been so accustomed to winning in these moments that it assumes inevitability, expects challengers to break under the weight of interruption and belittlement. But arrogance always miscalculates, thrives on repetition, and presumes tomorrow will look the same as yesterday. And it never accounts for what happens when someone refuses to be broken. That was the miscalculation the forces of dismissal made with Jasmine Crockett. She had lived through too many storms, faced too much skepticism, and endured too much doubt. To be undone by scoffs and sneers in broadcast studios or on national stages, while arrogance has crushed many, Crockett carried into that studio the strength of every dismissed voice, every underestimated student, every worker silenced in meetings, every woman told she was too loud or too unqualified for the role she had earned. The villain was ready once again to sneer, laugh, and silence. The arrogance had worked before and would be deployed again. But what arrogance did not know was that its performance was growing tired, its tricks worn thin, its power fraying beneath its own repetition, and when its force crashed into someone unwilling to give it deference, the entire spectacle would be revealed for what it was: hollow. This arrogance had crushed many before, but it had not met Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin under the glow of studio lights, but in humbler rooms, where the odds were stacked, and the whispers all said the same thing: she will not make it far. In classrooms, she was often underestimated before she even opened her mouth. Teachers sometimes lowered expectations quietly, not out of malice, but because years of bias had etched themselves into the system. Peers treated ambition from her as audacity. She learned early that excellence for her would not be applauded in the same way it would be questioned. It's doubted. Every time she raised her hand, every test she aced, felt like an uphill climb through someone else's disbelief. She did what so many young girls of color had to do. She persisted anyway. Where doors were half closed, she pushed. When her words were brushed off, she repeated them firmly, without apology. The bruises left by constant dismissal hardened into steel. Those early struggles didn't just create ambition. They created resilience, the bedrock she would later stand on in moments where arrogance tried to bulldoze over her voice. Her path into law was less about chasing prestige and more about finding a weapon against injustice. In law school, she studied with the weight not only of her own future, but with the conviction that her success could become a shield for others. Her career quickly became less glamorous than some might expect it, was in service to people without influence or money. Those who couldn't dream of high-profile representation. She defended the wrongfully accused, the silenced, the forgotten souls shuffled into a system built to grind them down. The image of Crockett's legal work is cinematic in its quiet intensity, her office lit only by lamplight at midnight. Stacks of case files swallowing her desk, her tired but unflinching eyes parsing through details others had overlooked. Courtroom played host to her transformation, not in bombastic theatrics, but in the composure she carried among hostile spaces. Judges leaned heavy on arrogance, rival attorneys tested her resolve, yet Crockett stood calm at the center. Even with odds stacked against her, she never gave arrogance the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. Her style wasn't to match bluster with bluster, but to absorb it, redirect it, and cut it down with truth, sharpened by preparation. Her reputation spread quickly. She wasn't just another attorney. She was the one who gave the voiceless a fighter's chance. The one who carried cases others wouldn't take, the one who embodied calm resistance in rooms designed to diminish her. There were days when she lost, nights when frustration carried heavy, but even then, the people she represented saw in her an advocate who did not abandon them in silence. Her leap into politics was rooted in the same authenticity. Crockett wasn't groomed by elite donors or polished in backroom preparation. She rose because ordinary people recognized her connection to their lives. At campaign stops, she didn't lean on empty rhetoric. She listened, and then she answered plainly. She didn't promise sweeping miracles. She promised to show up. to fight and to represent voices too often ignored. In crowded town halls, when hecklers tried to rattle her with laughter or insults, she didn't lash back. She stood calm, let the silence stretch, and let their noise collapse under its own pettiness. Then, when she spoke, she did so with the authority of lived experience, grounding herself in dignity in a way that audiences couldn't deny. Her authenticity became her sharpest weapon. Establishment figures dismissed her as raw, too blunt, too unrefined for the polished world of Washington. But in their critique lay the very proof of why people trusted her. Because she wasn't manufactured, she was real. The same urgency she carried from late nights defending the voiceless followed her onto the political stage. For restraint wasn't weakness. It was fire, smoldering calmly, waiting for moments of arrogance handed to her on a silver platter. The imagery of her political rise tells a story as resonant as her legal career, standing in front of nervous volunteers with warmth that steadied them, answering a sharp insult at a rally with a short, devastating fact, walking into spaces filled with condescension and leaving with respect because her poise demanded it. Hers was not the story of climbing gilded ladders, but of tearing down fences. That had kept others out. By the time she looked across at Patty Murray in that studio, Crockett carried an unspoken biography in her posture and presence. Every gaze steady, every word calm, every silence time. These weren't happenstance. They were the product of years spent being doubted, dismissed, ignored, and challenged. Where others saw an opponent to intimidate, what they missed was the weight of her preparation, drawn not just from study, but from life itself. Crockett's rise was never about spectacle. It was about survival turned into strategy, and strategy molded into service. And service, in turn, became the armor that protected her from the blows of arrogance. When arrogance tried to smirk her out of existence in that studio debate, she carried with her the lessons of every trial she had silently endured. Noise cannot undo clarity, arrogance cannot smother resilience, and respect is won not by demanding it, but by standing firm in truth. Every hardship, every dismissal, prepared her for the studio moment that silence would transform into history. The studio lights seemed hotter now, as if they too felt the rising friction inside the room. What began as sharp words quickly spiraled into a storm of dismissive challenges aimed squarely at Jasmine Crockett. With each question, the tone was less about inquiry and more about undermining her very right to be there. Critics peppered her, with challenges layered in condescension, voices dripping with impatience. Each interruption came with the same intention: to rattle her, to push her voice to the margins, to render her presence one of noise instead of authority. But Crockett absorbed it all. She let the interruptions wash over her, unblinking, her gaze steady, fixed, unshaken. Every scoff thrown her way only made her posture straighter. She waited her turn with patience that unnerved her detractors, and then answered, not hurried, not flustered, but sharpened into responses so clear that her words cut through the tangle of interruptions like a blade through fog. She did not match arrogance with arrogance. She drained it of its power by refusing to dance to its tempo. Each of her sentences reminded the audience that control did not always belong to the loudest voice, but to the voice that knew exactly when to strike. Patty Murray sat nearby, her face unreadable, eyes fixed on Crockett with an intensity that grew heavier as the exchanges wore on. Murray was not one to interject without reason, but her silence now felt active. Deliberate, a silence growing more significant with every Crockett reply. She listened to the arrogance volleying around. The stage listened to the attempts to smother dignity under belittlement, and she heard how Crockett dismantled it each time. Her silence was becoming the acknowledgement that something bigger was unfolding, a weight pressing down upon the entire room. The audience shifted in their seats, the unease palpable. Observers could sense the imbalance. Offenders who should have rattled Crockett instead exposed themselves through overreach, their dismissiveness escalating into desperation. The moderators tried to regain footing, but their hesitance only heightened the discomfort. Every moment revealed the contrast more starkly on one side, arrogance fraying into hollow repetition, and on the other, Crockett wielding composure. As her shield, her answers as precise as arrows finding their mark. With each round, Crockett's presence began to alter the rhythm of the room itself. Her pauses became more devastating than their interruptions. Her words, slower but deliberate, forced the audience to adjust their attention to her cadence instead of the noise surrounding. The air inside the chamber was heavy with static, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Representative Jasmine Crockett had just finished, her voice not raised but sharpened to a blade, carving through the noise, through the mockery, through the rehearsed disrespect that had been hurled her way. The villain of the day, smug and smirking in her chair, adjusted her papers as if nothing had stung, but her eyes told another story. Rattled, cornered, furious at the precision of Crockett's truth, and then nothing. No cough. No shuffle of papers. No hurried question from another member trying to reclaim center stage. Just silence. The awkward, undeniable weight of silence. Livestream captions stopped moving across screens nationwide, the scrolling a frozen waterfall of disbelief. In homes and offices, in earbuds, carried on subway trains. Watchers leaned closer, waiting, sensing something extraordinary had just cracked open. You could almost see the sound waves of Crockett's words circling the room like smoke, wrapping around staffers, reporters, even the opponents who thought they'd scripted her collapse. And in that suspended beat, eyes slowly turned, as if guided by gravity itself, toward one woman who had not made a sound all evening. Patty Murray, senior senator. Third in line to the presidency. Known in Washington not as a firebrand, but as something rarer, steady, unbending, an anchor in a city that often prizes showmanship over service. She had sat quietly through the storm, her presence unassuming. Her glasses perched with the patience of someone trained not to chase cameras, but to outlast them. Too many, she blended into the background, one of the longest-serving women in the Senate, yes, but rarely the headline. And yet just then, every face turned toward her. She didn't rush. Patty Murray had never been one to rush. Instead, she placed her papers neatly together, lifted her chin, leaned ever so slightly forward to the small silver microphone in front of her. A gentle tap sent a soft reverb across the room. It was like a fork against glass in a wedding hall, an instant shattering of every side conversation, every distraction. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't stall. When Patty Murray decides to speak, she does not ask permission from the noise. And then, the calm authority of someone who has seen decades of political storms and outlasted every one of them. She delivered 8 words that would launch Crockett's moment into immortality. Representative Crockett is correct. Single word. The chamber shuddered. Not literally, but in the way human bodies shift when something seismic just happened. A low inhale passed through staffers. Democrats felt their spines straightening in unison. Even Republicans, so skilled at sneering dismissals, found their lips pressed shut, forced into an uneasy glance with one another as the vacuum of denial collapsed around them. For a heartbeat, Crockett herself seemed suspended. The younger, lawmaker battle-worn, though barely into her congressional career, glanced toward the senator. Her eyes flickered with a recognition written in centuries of silenced voices. A sister had spoken. Not just any sister, a figure who rarely entered the fray of rhetorical scrums, whose power came in her refusal to play the circus. For Patty Murray to step in, for Patty Murray of all people, to validate a colleague across generational, racial, and political experience, was nothing short of extraordinary. Because Murray did more than agree. She wiped away the smear. She demolished, in 8 calm words, the narrative so often weaponized against women like Crockett, the notion that passion equals hysteria, that truth-telling equals aggression, that righteous fire equals lack of control. Murray's affirmation was quiet thunder, disproving years of stereotype in a single breath. And while the chamber processed, the outside world detonated. Across Twitter, yes, still stubbornly called Twitter by millions, hashtags were already birthing themselves. Hashtag Crockett was right began climbing within minutes. Screenshots of Murray's resolute expression, paired with Crockett's fierce gaze, filled TikTok feeds. Remixes spread like wildfire, Murray's clipped words, looped over soundtracks usually reserved for cinematic trailers. On the live stream feeds, hearts pulsated faster than the server could manage. Comments cascaded in waves. Did that just happen? Murray never talks like that. Respect. That's solidarity. Inside the room, you could notice even journalists who normally keep composure raising their eyebrows, whispering to colleagues. Reporters scribbled furiously, instinctively rewriting leads they'd drafted a half-hour earlier. This was no longer a clip of Green trying to bait a Dem meltdown. This was an entirely new storyline. Jasmine Crockett, the one her detractors tried so desperately to caricature, had received the rarest validation, not applause, not partisan cheerleading, but dignified, humble recognition from one of the Senate's most respected Democrats. And with that, the trap the antagonists had set collapsed in their own hands. Instead of a viral angry Democrat headline, America was met with the shadow of Patty Murray's unwavering tone. Calm. Almost grandmotherly, yet sharper than any pointed insult Green could dream of delivering. Imagine watching it at home. On television screens, viewers froze their dinner forks midair, glancing at each other, whispering, "Did Patty Murray just..." Clips were immediately texted into family group chats, celebrated with emojis and virtual applause. For Black women across America, the moment was more than political, it was deeply personal. To see Crockett both defend herself with eloquence and then be affirmed by Murray meant finally witnessing a kind of respect that has so often been denied in public halls of power. There's poetry in silence broken. Patty Murray understood that. She'd spent most of her career wielding policy more than headlines, substance more than fire. And that's why her 8 words landed like an earthquake. Because when those who almost never enter the noise suddenly do, their words carry the weight of a cathedral bell. Crockett's rebuttal had already pierced, but Murray's response cemented it as history. 8 words had transformed one hearing into something unforgettable, reshaping how the press would remember it, how voters would share it, how young women scrolling through TikTok would feel about who gets to speak and be believed, and for the antagonists, the provocateurs who thrive. On chaos, there was no retort. What could they say? To argue against Murray wasn't just to dismiss Crockett, it was to dismiss one of the most respected Democratic figures left in public life. The silence that followed was as telling as her words. The villain had no laugh, line, no forced grin strong enough to hide defeat. This was bigger than Crockett's own victory. It was generational. It was symbolic. It was that rare collision in politics when authenticity and validation fused, creating an explosion no antagonist could spin back into control. And it unfolded live in real time, echoing across platforms faster than political operatives could. Scrambled to respond. For Crockett, it was vindication. Years of being forced to carry herself with unflinching resilience against endless waves of dismissal suddenly received a witness. It's not a savior, not someone swooping in to fight her battles, but someone powerful enough to publicly anchor her truth. For Murray, it was affirmation of her own quiet philosophy. Speak rarely, but when you do, make it matter forever. 8 words. That was all it took. And as the committee struggled to compose itself, as watchers online turned the moment into a cultural milestone, a new kind of tension formed, because far beyond the chamber, beyond the Capitol dome, a digital inferno was already igniting. But the fire didn't end there because social media was about to ensure this moment echoed everywhere. The silence of that chamber didn't last long because outside those walls, the internet was already exploding. Within minutes of Patty Murray's steady words echoing across microphones, the clip was clipped, captioned, and launched into the bloodstream of social media like a political lightning strike. Hashtag Crockett was right, shot to the top of Twitter's trending list before the committee even adjourned. Journalists who had been typing ordinary recaps tossed their drafts aside, tweeting instead, "History just happened. Senator Murray validates Representative Jasmine Crockett live." And with that, a digital wildfire was unleashed. The spliced videos multiplied. One popular version slowed the moment down into cinematic slow motion. Crockett's fiery gaze. Murray's calm lean into the microphone, the 8 words delivered with impossible control. Underneath, creators added orchestral swells, usually reserved for movie trailers. The tone was clear. This was no longer just a committee hearing. This was iconic American theater. On TikTok, the creativity took on another life. Remixes paired Murray's voice with dance beats, with cartoon thunderclaps, even with Beyoncé anthems. Teens who'd never watched a congressional hearing in their lives stitched reaction videos, wide-eyed, clapping their hands, shouting at their screens. One creator called it the anti-alliance. A generational moment where Crockett's younger fire and Murray's elder calm formed a tandem that reminded millions. Truth comes in many tones, but when aligned, it is unstoppable. Within hours, that phrase became its own hashtag. YouTube reactors joined the rush. Liberal commentators paused mid-live stream to watch the clip again and again, parsing not just Crockett's rebuttal, but Murray's validation. Conservative commentators tried to toss it off as Senate politeness, but this was no token nod, and audiences knew it. The body language said what words could not. She meant it. The celebrity class followed next. A-list actors, musicians, and athletes poured their awe into tweets and Instagram stories. One actor wrote, "This is what truth looks like." Courage validated. A chart-topping singer reposted the video with the caption, "Auntie Patty just baptized that room." Even veteran activists weighed in, noting how rarely such a gesture of solidarity actually surfaces in halls where power is usually measured. In interruptions, not affirmations, but perhaps the most visceral reaction came from communities who saw themselves directly reflected in the moment. Black women online flooded timelines not with detached political commentary, but with raw relief and joy. Many wrote variations of the same sentiment. It feels so rare to see a black woman defended, not in whispers after the fact, but loud and immediate. Their comments weren't just applause for Crockett. They were gratitude for Murray inserting herself as an amplifier, not a translator. It was validation without dilution, respect without compromise. Young political watchers, especially Gen Z, found in the moment a spark of inspiration. On Discord servers, Reddit threads, and TikTok explainers, the clip became coursework in real time. An example of how to confront disrespect with courage and how allies can back that up in a way that sticks. For many, this became a sit-up hand-listen moment, a kind of "where were you when?" anecdote for the digital age. They were watching not just politics, but history in motion, accessible in the palm of their hand. Meanwhile, institutions that often act as delayed amplifiers began catching up. Morning Joe replayed the clip 3 times the next day, panelists nodding visibly as if they had watched lightning in real time. The View dissected it mid-table, Whoopi Goldberg leaning forward to underline how generations of women in politics are finally beginning to lift each other in more public ways. Political podcasts flagged it as the moment that broke format evidence that the grassroots want not just policy, but cinematic proof that dignity still has defenders. Opponents scrambled. Conservative corners spun furiously, calling it overreaction or trying to minimize Murray's words as procedural support. But it was too late. The clip existed. Camera angles don't lie. Every viewer could see Crockett's precision, Murray's validation, and Green's uncomfortable attempts to regroup. Spin doesn't outlive visual evidence in this piece of evidence, spread across every platform imaginable. The validation began to take material form. Designers mocked. Up posters within hours, Crockett's fiery stance beside Murray's calm nod, emblazoned with "Crockett was right." Print shops on Etsy began selling t-shirts with Murray's simple phrase in bold letters. Protest chants picked it up, the line morphing into canned response during city rallies. Asterisk voice 1. Who was right? Asterisk crowd. Crockett was right. This wasn't just social media clout. It was transformation. Words had become community property. They'd entered the culture, stamped themselves on the timeline of collective resistance. For Crockett, this wave of embrace meant something beyond likes and retweets. It meant her truth was no longer hers alone. It had been picked up and carried by millions of voices who were ready to hold it up as a banner. The exhaustion of carrying that fight by herself suddenly lightened, transformed into momentum. And still, what lingered beneath the avalanche of memes and hashtags was something deeper, harder to quantify, but impossible to deny. People weren't just laughing at TikTok edits or sharing Murray's microphone tap. They were reconsidering a question older than the republic itself. Who gets to speak with dignity, and who gets to confirm that dignity in public? Which is why, after the laughter, the memes, and the endless remixes burned across social feeds, one truth remained undeniable. Beyond the trendiness of hashtags, beyond any internet cycle that usually sputters out in a day this clip pressed on a permanent nerve, it became less about politics and more about place, about belonging, about whose voice is allowed to carry, and whose affirmation can make the country pause and listen. But beyond the memes and moments came something even more powerful, a reframing of who gets to belong in American dignity. For all the clips, the hashtags, the GIFs, looping into infinity, one truth cut through louder than anything else. This wasn't about a mic drop. It wasn't even about scoring a political point. What Jasmine Crockett did in that chamber, and what Patty Murray affirmed with 8 calm words, was to remind America that dignity isn't fragile, it's unshakable. Crockett's power wasn't measured in volume or theatrical flourish. Her strength was not simply that she had the right argument or the right facts at her fingertips. It was her unrelenting composure, sharpened by years of experience in courtrooms and in battles much harsher than a televised hearing. She understood that when the trap is disrespect, the true counterattack is refusing to collapse under its weight. She stayed centered. She stayed clear. And in that state of grace, she did not just defend herself, she defended the dignity of every person who has ever been spoken over. Then Murray made the lesson eternal. Because what she proved with her validation is that allies don't always have to roar in the same register as the person under attack. They don't have to dominate the room, compete for spotlight, or make themselves the story. What matters is that when the balance tips, they tip it back. Quietly, firmly, undeniably. She showed that solidarity can arrive cloaked in humility, and yet strike with enormous force. One reporter later quoted Crockett as reflecting that she doesn't come into work looking for fights, but she won't run from them either. That line captures it perfectly. This whole encounter was not about pushing for a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't about winning a debate. It was instead about planting a flag. Here is the line where grace stands, where belonging resists. Erasure, where identity refuses to apologize for its presence. Think about the symbolism for a moment. A younger black congresswoman, fiery and unflinching, standing shoulder to shoulder figuratively, and then literally, with an older white senator whose reputation is consistency, endurance, and steadiness. 2 women from different generations, different geographies, even different tones of leadership. And yet, instead of clashing or competing, they built a bridge in full view of the nation. Crockett embodied the fire of now, Murray the stillness of legacy. Together, they created an undeniable force. It raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. Why is it that America often only hears when dignity interrupts disrespect so dramatically? Why must moments like these be so rare? The answer isn't comfortable. Our culture teaches us to tune out steady voices until the clash is unavoidable. But that also means disruption, when infused with dignity, rings louder. Murray's few words became louder than hours of shouting. Crockett's calm rebuttal echoed more powerfully than all the insults thrown at her. For those who have felt invisible, ignored, spoken over, this was your moment, because you know exactly how it feels to sit in a room drowning with noise, too. Feel your words slide past ears that have no intention of listening, and suddenly in that hearing, dignity itself became audible. Crockett's refusal to be diminished.
Ow.
Murray's affirmation that her words deserved respect. That combination carved out space for everyone who has ever been silenced. It's easy to see politics through the prism of division, wins and losses, sound bites and scandals. But what happened crossed beyond politics. It was a reminder that the fight for dignity is older than any party affiliation, larger than any hearing. It is not performative. It is survival. It is belonging, sometimes. It only takes a pair of voices, one fierce, one calm, to rattle the entire conversation. There's a reason the internet latched onto it. Behind the memes was something deeper. People yearn for examples where courage does not lead to isolation, where speaking your truth is not punished with silence, but met with validation. Crockett wasn't left hanging. That mattered. It's because too often truth tellers are abandoned, left to carry the burden alone. Murray showed the blueprint. Don't leave people alone when it costs nothing but courage to stand with them. So remember this. If you've ever felt unseen in a room full of noise, this moment was for you. If you've ever needed someone, anyone, to say, "I hear you," and you are right, Murray modeled how important those few words can be. And if you've ever doubted whether truth can pierce through the spectacle, Crockett showed it absolutely. Dignity was, indeed, the loudest sound in the room. And the echo is still rolling, rattling ceilings far above that hearing chamber, slipping into conversations at kitchen tables, classrooms, office hallways. This was not just a political victory. This was dignity, validated and amplified, becoming a collective anthem. And if you feel that energy, hold on to it. Because as we soon discover, the story doesn't close here. This reframing of belonging, this collision of truth and solidarity, would ripple well beyond those walls, into movements, into chants, into the ways America answers the timeless question: who gets to belong? What makes this story unforgettable isn't the back and forth, the sparring, or the noise of politics. It's that in a room built to drown people out, one woman stood with steadiness, and another answered with solidarity. What Jasmine Crockett delivered was not a debate. It was a statement, forged from years of resilience, sharpened against every attempt to dismiss her. What Patty Murray added, in 8 words, sealed it as truth. Crockett wasn't just speaking into a void, but she was being respected. That's the legacy of this moment. Not the clash, but the validation. Crockett's fire and Murray's calm created a rare alliance where dignity itself became impossible to ignore. And if you take one lesson from it, let it be this. In a world addicted to noise and spectacle, the winning force is not volume. It's clarity, composure, and authenticity. So be like Jasmine, clear, fearless, grounded in truth even when surrounded by disrespect. And be like Murray, when you see honesty and courage in the room, don't leave it standing alone. Validate it out loud. Because others are watching, and your affirmation may be the difference between a moment flickering out or blazing into movement. If this moment made you feel proud, if it reignited a little bit of faith in what solidarity can sound like, don't let it stop here. Share this story. Spread it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And in the comments, tell us, whose voice do you believe needs validating next? Because trust me, the story doesn't end here. Not even close. Wait until you hear who clapped back at Jim Jordan last week.